British writer Joan Rowling suddenly, to her own surprise, wrote the most popular series of books in the world, the story of the boy wizard Harry Potter. A fever called Potteromania reached the world in a global sense. Crowds of people stood in lines for books on the day they went on sale. Speculators sold them at furious prices on the black market. Hollywood made a series of deafeningly successful films. What is the secret of this fabulous story about a boy who suddenly realizes that he is a wizard? Why did children all over the world stop surfing the internet and play video games, and started reading voluminous books, and then wait with impatience for a sequel? The key to the success of Harry Potter is in its author. More precisely, in the root cause, which prompted an adult woman with a child in her arms to write a children's book. Initially, Joan Rowling did not seek to earn money on Harry Potter, and she did not seek writer's fame. Writing for her began as a therapy. Rowling wanted to free herself from a story invented many years ago, and also to get away from the reality surrounding her at that time: poverty, depression, unemployment and broken marriage. Rowling's story of Harry Potter was hard-fought. She wrote the first book, being an unemployed single mother, living on benefits and finding the joy of life only in her daughter and this book. After all, she ended the saga already in the status of a super-successful billionaire writer and happy wife. Joan Rowling was born on July 31, 1965 in the English city of Yate, Gloucestershire, 16 kilometers away from Bristol. Her father, Peter Rowling, worked as a Rolls-Royce engineer, and her mother, Anne Vallon, was a technical specialist. On her mother's side, Rowling has Scottish and French roots. Her parents met in 1964 at King's Cross Station in London, on a train to Edinburgh. The meeting turned out to be life-defining. A year later Joan was born, and 2 years later, her younger sister Diana. The father really wanted the firstborn to be a boy, so in the family the eldest daughter was called the male version of her name, Jo. The closest people to her were her mother and sister. It was for little Diana that 6-year-old Joan wrote her first story, about a rabbit named Rabbit, who fell ill with measles and hosted guests at home, including a giant bee named Miss Bee. The Rowling family changed their place of residence several times. When Joan was 9, they moved to the village of Gants Hill, near the city of Chepstow. Here the future writer studied in high school, and her mother worked there in the Department of Science. At school, Joan was a bookworm, the headman of the class, and she subsequently admitted that Hermione in the first Harry Potter books reminds her of herself. Hermione in general is based on me. She's a caricature of me when I was 11 years old, which I'm not particularly proud of. The teenage period for Rowling was not easy. In 1978, her mother's hands suddenly started shaking while she was drinking tea. According to the results of an examination, she was diagnosed with disseminated sclerosis. Anne Rowling's condition gradually deteriorated. A few years later she left school and began working as a cleaner in a local church. Later, she could only move around only in a wheelchair. Joan looked after her mother, but the relationship with her father was tense. Rowling has not communicated with him for many years. I wasn't particularly happy. It was a terrible time of life. Many years later, the writer described her teenage years. In the last classes of the school, Rowling prepared for admission to Oxford and studied English, French and German extensively. In the first 2 disciplines, she eventually received excellent grades and passed German with good grade. As a result, admission to Oxford did not work out. The future writer entered the Exeter University, which she graduated in 1986 with a bachelor's degree in French and classical philology. Her French professor at Exeter, Martin Sorel, recalls her as quiet, competent student in a denim jacket and with dark hair, who did everything necessary in terms of an academic program. Rowling herself assures that she did nothing at all, but instead applied lots of eyeliner, listened to the Smiths and read Dickens and Tolkien. However, her academic strength was enough to spend 1 year on a language internship in Paris. After receiving her diploma, Rowling moved to London and got a job as a secretary in the research department of the human rights organisation Amnesty International. In London, she begins her first serious relationship and moves to Manchester with a young man. Here comes a series of her frequent train trips between Manchester and London. It was on one of these trips in 1990 that an event occurred that dramatically changed her whole life. 25-year-old Rowling was returning from Manchester to London. The train was delayed for 4 hours, and during this time the idea of a novel about a wizard boy came to her mind. According to Rowling, the story appeared as an insight, fully decorated. Interestingly, the finale of the entire Harry Potter saga, which readers learned almost 20 years later only in the last part of the series, the writer came up with exactly then, in the same train. I just sat and thought for 4 hours while all these details bubbled in my brain. And this skinny black-haired boy with glasses, who did not know that he was a wizard, became more and more real to me. It all started with Harry, and then all these characters and situations poured into my head. Rowling recalled the light bulb moment. When she returned back home, she began to write the book Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone that very evening, the creation of which took her 5 years, full of loss, despair and unfulfilled hopes. In December of that year, Rowling's mother dies of disseminated sclerosis, and she, trying to overcome difficult thoughts, decides to move to another country. According to an announcement in the Guardian newspaper, Joan found a job as an English teacher in the Portuguese city of Porto. There she taught English in the evening, and in the afternoon she wrote the first book about Harry, either in bars or at home, playing Tchaikovsky's violin concert in the background. In one of the bars, she met the local television journalist Jorge Arantes. He was an energetic, fun man. They kissed the first day they met. Their romantic relationship developed rapidly. At the beginning of the relationship, Rowling became pregnant, but unfortunately a miscarriage occurred. Misfortune brought young people closer, and some time later the Portuguese proposed to Joan. She agreed, although her friends advised her not to rush. Jorge loved to drink, was rude and a gushing person. However, it didn't stop the girl in love. They married on October 16, 1992, and on July 27, 1993 their daughter Jessica was born. However, this did not save the family. When the child was 3.5 months old, the couple broke up, and not as friends. Arantes beat Rowling and kicked her out into the street at night. She called the police and with their help took her daughter away and wandered around friends for 2 weeks. As a result, Joan decided to go home. In December 1993, she and her daughter in arms and several chapters of Harry Potter in a suitcase returned to the United Kingdom, where they stayed in Edinburgh with her younger sister Diana, who lived in Scotland with her husband. At that moment, Rowling considered herself the biggest loser. Her marriage broke up, she was unemployed and with a small child in her arms. She was diagnosed with clinical depression. But what seemed to be a dead end, in the end, became a liberation. Failure meant getting rid of everything insignificant. I was freed because my greatest fear was realized, and I was still alive. I still had a daughter I loved, an old typewriter and a big idea. And so the rock floor became a solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. Rowling was assigned a social security, so she was able to rent an apartment. Joan wrote in Nicholson's and The Elephant House, which are now popular with Harry Potter fans, adjacent to the house. There were rumors that the author worked in a cafe because there was no heating in her apartment. However, Rowling refuted these speculations. I was poor for real. I was a typical poor person in a modern-day's Great Britain, but not homeless. I'm not that crazy to rent an unheated apartment in Edinburgh in the middle of winter. It's just that my daughter fell asleep better when we were walking outside. In 1994, Rowling's husband came to Edinburgh from Portugal in search of his daughter. She, fearing separation from the child, received the sole right to guardianship through judicial procedures, and in August of that year filed for divorce. At the same time, Joan continued to work vigorously on her first book and completed the manuscript in 1995. She was rejected by 12 publishers before the London publisher Bloomsbury became interested in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone a year later. According to legend, the head of the publishing house Nigel Newton tested manuscripts of children's books on his 8-year-old daughter Alice, which, having read the first chapters of the Harry Potter story, demanded more. The publisher decided that the case could turn out great, and gave his consent to publish the book. However, the editor gave Joan no real hope. The editor of the publishing house honestly warned Rowling that she was unlikely to make money on children's literature, and advised her to find a permanent job. He couldn't have been more wrong. In June 1997, Bloomsbury published a trial edition of the book, a hilarious 1,000 copies. 500 pieces went on sale, and another 500 were distributed in libraries. Now these collection treasures cost from £16,000 to £25,000. The book was published under the male name J.K. Rowling. The publisher insisted on this, believing that the story could lose part of the target audience, since the boys would not want to read a book written by a woman. Rowling had no middle name, and she borrowed it from her grandmother, Kathleen. In the same year, debutante author J.K. Rowling receives a grant of £8,000 from the Scottish Arts Council to continue the series, and the book Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone gets the Nestle Smarties Book Prize and British Book Award as the Best Children's Book of the Year. In 1998, the book was published in the United States with the changed title Harry Potter and the Magical Stone. Publishers considered the word sorceress too complex and potentially repelling the children's audience. Subsequently, Rowling regretted this and said that if her situation was stronger then, she would not agree to it. Nevertheless, it was after the publication overseas that the world began a general Potteromania. The children used to read the book, the copies were all over the place, a fan community was formed, and the Hollywood giant Warner Brothers began to assemble a team to make a movie. Rowling woke up famous. With money received from the publisher, she moved to her own house in Edinburgh and was free to write the following books in the series. By the year 2000, 4 parts of the Harry Potter saga were released. The fourth, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, appeared simultaneously in the UK and the USA on July 8, 2000 and broke sales records in both countries. In 2001, the story was transferred from the book to the movie screen. In November 2001, the director of the cult family series Home Alone, Chris Columbus, shot the film Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. The movie had great success, and next movies on books in the series were filmed immediately. Rowling took part in the work on the script, and in the last 2 films she even acted as a producer. Subsequent Harry Potter books continued to break sales records, and in December 2006, readers were announced the title of the 7th, final, part of the saga, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. It was almost a biblical story about how Harry was sincerely ready to die in order to defeat evil, and therefore survived. It was released on July 21, 2007 and became the best-selling book of all time. Only on the first day of sales in the USA and the UK, there were 11 million copies sold. This story turned out to be final only for a while and received an unexpected development on the theatre stage. In 2016, 9 years after the release of the 7th part, a sequel appeared, a sensational play with a black actress in the role of Hermione, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. The play was written by playwright Jack Thorne, but with the creative participation of Rowling, and the action in it takes place immediately after the events described in the 7th book. The play received rave reviews from the public and 9 Laurence Olivier Awards, including for the Best New Play. A lot has changed in the life of Joan Rowling during the work on the Harry Potter saga. Firstly, in December 2001, she married the anesthesiologist Neil Murray and gave birth to 2 children, in 2003, son David, and 2 years later, daughter Maxence. Secondly, Rowling became a very wealthy person. Back in 2004, Forbes named her the first person to become a dollar billionaire due to book writing. Joan denied this, saying that she has a lot of money, but she is not a billionaire. A few years later, this was confirmed in Forbes, noting that Rowling had lost her billionaire status, giving a significant part of her fortune to charity. It's true. Having barely become financially successful and having bought houses in Scotland and the prestigious London Kensington district, Rowling began to generously spend money and time on charity projects. I think you have a moral responsibility when you get much more than you need, says the writer. In the year 2000, she created Fund for Fight Against Poverty and Social Inequality, Valant Charitable Trust, and she also headed Fund of the Help to Single Parents as she was also a single parent in the past. For the charity fund Comic Relief, she wrote the books Quidditch from Antiquity to the Present Day and Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. These stories managed to raise £15.7 million. The second book was subsequently successfully filmed. Rowling's separate charity project is supporting research related to the treatment of disseminated sclerosis. Rowling's mother died of it in 1990, and she does not spare her remunerations to contribute to the fight against this disease. In 2006, the writer funded the creation of a new Centre for Regenerative Medicine at the University of Edinburgh, which was subsequently renamed after her mother Anne. In 2010, the writer donated another £10 million to the centre. However, there are dark spots on Rowling's reputation. A few years ago, she provoked massive accusations of transphobia after publicly criticizing the term menstruating people on her Twitter. This was considered an insult to trans and non-binary people. Rowling was shamed by many celebrities, including a significant part of the cast of Harry Potter. As a result, Rowling even wrote an open essay explaining her position and answering criticism. "I know and love trans people, but most women find the term menstruating people humiliating," noted Rowling. Then she signed an open letter in support of freedom of speech. In addition to the author of Harry Potter, another 150 celebrities signed the letter. The year 2011 became the turning point for the writer. She officially ended the relationship with the Harry Potter series, parting with her former literary agency. Rowling announced that she was writing a new book, and this time for adults. In the fall of 2012, the book The Casual Vacancy was published, a tragicomic social satire, which in the first 3 weeks of sales sold around the world with 1 million copies. In the same year, the BBC channel began creating a mini-series based on the book. The author herself actively participated in writing the script. When working on the next project, Joan Rowling decided to take a break from the burden of popularity and release a book under a pseudonym for which no one would know it. She wanted objective reviews from critics and readers. In April 2013, Little Brown Publishing released The Detective The Cuckoo's Calling, a debut novel by Robert Galbraith. The book was published in a circulation of 1,500 copies and received positive reviews from critics. It was called the Star Debut and the Debut of the Month. However, critics suspected something wrong almost immediately. India Knight, a columnist for the Sunday Times, tweeted that the book was too good for a newcomer. The newspaper began its own investigation of this hoax, comparing the names of literary agents and putting together pieces of a large puzzle. As a result, information about the true author of The Cuckoo's Calling was declassified by the wife of one of the partners of the law firm, whose services were used by Joan Rowling. After that, sales of the book grew by 4,000%, and the publishing house urgently had to print out the circulation. 5 books were published in the detective series about Detective Cormoran Strike, and in 2017 a TV series Strike was shot based on it. Currently, Joan Rowling lives with her family in Edinburgh. She continues to do charity work, plays Minecraft with her son and writes children's literature again. In October 2021, her book, The Christmas Pig, was published. Once the tale of Harry Potter saved her from depression, and then it helped to grow up a whole generation of children around the world. In this regard, it will be safe to say that if Rowling is so good at writing for children, then her return to children's literature will definitely benefit everyone.